I'm Nora Hale, 32. I co-founded Kitelock Security. I signed the sale to Nexora for over 50 million. I still run the small business security unit. I approve real budgets. People return my calls. Inside my family, none of that sticks. Here, I'm the one who never settled down. The one who might need a little help. They hand me a gift card for interview clothes. They ask if I took the bus. They talk about me like I'm not in the room. That's the fight who I am in the world versus who they've decided I am at home. I'm not here to argue it. I'm here because my parents need care and because I've arranged something that will end the guessing. A ride is on its way. When it arrives, the conversation will change. The front door gives its old blunt knock as it swings open. Pine cleaner hangs in the air. I drag a frayed duffel up the steps. The strap bites my palm and leaves a thin red line. Grant fills the doorway, half smile, half checkpoint. "You're late," he says. "Shuttle stuck." There it is, the first little swipe of the day. I step past him and hug my mother before I answer anything. She has a crutch tucked under one arm, her steps small and careful. "You made it," she says, trying to sound like she's not in pain. I did. I keep my eyes off Grant's steel watch, the one he likes to lift just enough to remind everyone he's on time and important. Sienna comes out of the kitchen with a small paper bag. "For you," she says, bright and kind in the way kindness sometimes stings. "A few vouchers, in case you have interviews. Gift card as pity. Neat, cheap, and hard to refuse without making a scene." "Thank you." I say, fold the bag once and set it beside my duffel. The clean paper makes the old fabric look worse. That's part of the point. "Let's get started," Grant says, tilting his chin toward the living room. 9 sharp. I've got slides. The room hasn't changed, faded floral couch, tired rug, the thermostat clicking on and off like a tired insect in the wall. On the coffee table sit 2 printed place cards, Grant and Sienna centered and straight. For me, there's a torn scrap of paper, guessed in blue pen. 3 coffee spoons are laid out in a line. The 4th is missing. Mum lowers herself into the armchair and winces as the crutch bumps her leg. "Did you eat, honey?" she asks softly. "There's toast." "I'm okay," I say. The bag brushes wood and makes a dry sound. Grant opens the laptop and wakes a travel projector. A chart fills the wall. Before we get into it, he says, turning toward me, "Can you update us on your current work? Just so we know your capacity to contribute." Capacity. Like I'm a water tank. Work is stable, I say. "I'll help." Sienna edges closer to Mum, hand on the chair back, eyes on me. "We just want stability for you too," she says. "A real job. Benefits, professional environment. You should think about it. Stability, the family version be more like us." Smile, nod. "I'll think about it," I say. My phone buzzes in my pocket. It's the confirmation I've been waiting for. The pickup is on schedule. Approach, plan set. I text back one line. Use the front lawn, keep the approach quiet, and put the phone away. The glass feel stays on my fingertips. Miles steps in, keys jingling. "Sorry I'm late," he says, tossing a grin around the room. "Traffic. Oh, I've got photos of the kitchen upgrade. Italian marble. You'll love the light." His eyes drop to my duffel. "Travelling light, huh? Light enough," I say. I pull the ottoman closer. It wobbles once under my knee, a small hint about where I sit in this room. Grant notices, doesn't fix it, sets his laser pointer beside his coffee instead. "Okay," he says, switching into presentation voice. The screen shows a manicured lawn and pale stone buildings. 3 facilities met the quality bar. "We'll review care models' costs and an equitable split." Mum tilts her head toward me. "You look healthy," she says, choosing each word. Her eyes drift to the loose thread on my sweater cuff, then to my scuffed shoes. "If you need anything, tell me." I'm okay. The words are plain on purpose. Enough to calm her, not enough to open a new argument. Grant moves through bullet points. I count his breath when he says, "Costs watch Sienna," nod on each beat, like she's trained for it. Miles snaps a photo of the slide and whispers something to Sienna about brand tone. I don't interrupt. I let their version of me keep talking in their voices. My phone buzzes again. Second confirmation. On approach, soon. I picture the route in my head, the angle over the maple tree, the way the windows sometimes rattle if you come in too steep. Neighbours will look, they always do. I don't love that part. Today, I need it. Sienna taps the paper bag with a manicured nail. Try these brands, she says. Good collars, clean shoulders. Very proper. That word sticks right where the thread is loose. Good to know, I say. Grant clears his throat and points at a new slide. Fair allocation, he says, tone, even, and firm like a printer. Those with more ability carry more weight. We've calculated a shortfall. I can take 45. Sienna and Miles 40. Nora 15. $1,200. The price of my seat at the table. I lift the guest scrap. The edge bites my fingertip. In my head, a different deck documents already signed calls I've already made funds already, parked rooms already held for my parents. I put the scrap back exactly where it was. Let it sit there and do its small job. Mum leans toward me. Are you truly okay? She whispers. I place my hand over hers. Warm. Thin skin. I'm here, I say. 2 words she can rest on. 2 words I can stand behind. Grant clicks again. Numbers fill the wall. This is the gap, he says, tapping the screen with the red dot. This is what needs to be covered monthly. Sienna notices the missing spoon. Use a soup spoon, she asks, smiling too brightly. I can use my hand, I say, and I smile back. Not because it's funny. Because I know something none of them know in a few minutes. A new sound will take this room, and the story they've told about me will stop making sense. I feel the breeze shift through the window frame. Leaves twitch on the maple outside. The house makes a tiny settling noise in the wall. I squeeze my mother's hand once and let go. Right, Grant says. Costs. He doesn't notice the change in the air. I do. I've been waiting for it. I've kept quiet all morning, not because I'm small, but because timing matters. The ride I called is close. When it arrives, I won't have to correct anyone. I won't have to explain my life. I'll just open the door. The wall glows with costs and Grant keeps talking, but my mind slips to how I got here and why I keep my mouth shut. In high school, the roles were set like name tags. Grant, the student body president, shaking hands like a small mayor. Sienna, the homecoming queen, waving from a float. And me in the library pushing a website live for the hardware store on Main. The counsellor asked about college applications, and I said I had a client deadline on Friday. They were seen. I was useful. Useful doesn't get a yearbook page, but it pays for gas. 10 years ago, at a quiet dinner with overcooked roast, Grant talked internships, Sienna flashed ring photos, and I said I wasn't going back next semester. Dad looked at the salt shaker and said, I'd regret it. Mum said kind, but firm, finish a degree, get a sensible job, then dream. Sensible sounded like a door with no handle from my side. A week later, I left at dawn with $200 in an envelope, a backpack, a duffel, and one old laptop. Bus station coffee, diesel in the air, no one coming to carry any of it. Fine. The first startup was a cold window, a shared desk, and bills I couldn't quite cover. I coded, I cold emailed. I waited for checks that bounced. I heard the landlord's 2-knuckle tap. I ate rice and eggs and used a hoodie for a pillow and told myself I wasn't wrong, just early, and being early hurts. The second startup was web apps for small boutiques. It moved for a season, then stalled. Cash burned faster than I learned. A client got hit by a small hack. I sat up all night patching, watching logs stutter, and something clicked. People pay for locks before they pay for chandeliers. I turned to security for small businesses because they needed to sleep and no one spoke their language. I rented a tiny studio with a leaky ceiling and wrote until my wrists ached. I sketched a simple protocol that made sense for a shop with one register, and a site filed the paperwork and waited. My lawyer said I might have something. Hope felt dangerous, so I carried it quiet. Traction came slow and honest. 5 paying clients, then 15. I answered support at 2 a.m. and shipped fixes before sunrise. Stripe pinged. I bought real groceries. It wasn't luck. It was cause and effect and not quitting. The patent cleared. The product got a spine. We signed real contracts. We hired carefully. Word spread in church halls and diner back rooms, with no press release, just they picked up the phone and they fixed it. Then came Nexora. Frosted glass, due diligence lists that looked like punishment, and I could answer them without notes. They put a big number on the table. I kept equity. I kept the small business unit. The banker said I could walk away. I said I wasn't done. Ownership isn't only stock, it's being able to say no and mean it. 6 months ago, I signed. The money landed. I didn't buy a new car. The old one still starts. I paid what needed paying, and I set up Harbourlight Senior Care because Dad had started dropping names, and I wanted a place I could trust if today ever came. I toured a small home memory unit. No blaring TV, bright kitchens, short hall staff who knew first names and had time to sit. The director said dignity is architecture too, and I said, then let's build for it. We did. I funneled money there not for the optics, but for a future I could live with. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet at home. Jeans and old sweater work that speaks only to the people it serves. My team knew, my friends knew, my family did not. Why the silence freedom needs quiet. Safety needs privacy. And the cuts from Be Practical never healed right. A few years back, on a family call, Grant offered an entry-level role to stabilise me, and Sienna asked if my roommates kept me up. I said I was fine. I learned to let people be wrong about me. Silence is cheaper than arguing. I spent what I would have used on proof to build things instead, the product, the team, the foundation. I wrote checks and plans my family never asked about. If they needed it someday, it would be there. If not, it would help someone else. The projector hum pulls me back. The wall is still full of numbers. Grant says fair allocation. Sienna nods on cue. Miles adjusts his cuff so the logo faces out. I don't need them to believe me. I need my parents cared for. Contracts are drafted. Placement is held. Funds are ready. Transport is scheduled. If they say yes, we move. If they say no, it waits. A small breeze slips through the window frame and the maple leaves shiver. Mum's hand rests near mine, warm and light. I steady my breath. Grant taps the screen with a red dot. This is the gap, he says. This is what needs to be covered monthly. He doesn't know I already covered it differently and fully with a path that keeps our parents human. He thinks my quiet is surrender. It isn't. It's timing. It's protecting the work until the moment it matters. I straighten the scrap of paper with my name written as guest. It's a small thing I can control while everything else lines up. Sienna nudges the paper bag of vouchers toward me and says I should try those stores because they'll help me look the part. I almost laugh, but I don't. I'm not here to win a scene. I'm here to change the outcome. I say thanks, and inside, I line up the next calls. The director, the move date, the medical packet, the tour. I picture Dad with a warm mug at a small table not lost in noise, and Mum walking a short hall with a rail under her hand. I can live with them calling me less if the people I love get more. Grant clicks to bigger numbers, the air tightens. I keep my voice even and say, I'm listening, I am. I'm listening to my brother and also to the plan I built steady under the noise. When the moment comes, I won't raise my volume. No speech will fix this. Action will. First action, get my parents in front of the right doctors today. Yesterday, Grant called with the kind of clipped voice he saves for numbers and bad news. Mum fell and fractured her hip. Dad's memory is slipping faster. "We need a family meeting," he said. I said I would be there. I booked a seat, packed the old duffel, chose jeans gone soft at the knees, and a sweater with a loose thread, and kept my head down. I flew. Commercial sat between a man asleep with his mouth open and a woman answering emails without looking up, and I liked it that way. No attention, no questions. At the curb, I took a taxi straight to the house. Vinyl seat country radio, low the driver, talking about roadwork like it was a weather report. I thanked him and rolled the duffel to the porch. That got me here. The reason I came is still the same: get care moving. While Grant talks through costs, I watch Mum shift in her chair. I lean in and ask quietly, 0 to 10, where is your pain right now? She says 6 and smiles like it's 3. She hates making trouble. I help her try the sit to stand. The therapist showed her feet, under knees, lean forward, stand without pushing off with her hands. Her body argues with the idea. She wobbles, exhales, sits again. We pause. We'll try later with the walker. She nods. Dad studies the slideshow like it's a test he can pass if he stares long enough. 10 minutes ago, he told me about a neighbour's dog. He tells me again now, same words, same chuckle in the same place. Then he asks what day it is. I answer. He nods like that fixes it, then calls me by Sienna's name and pats my hand. I let it go. This isn't stubborn. This is the disease, and it needs a specialist, not a lecture about keeping track. I step into the hallway and call the hospital back. The coordinator's voice is kind, but busy. There's one opening with the memory specialist this afternoon. If the family can get him here today, we can start the workup. If not, the next slot is weeks away. Weeks is not acceptable when he is losing days inside single mornings. We'll make it, I say. I check drive times on my phone. Traffic building 28 miles. Construction near the river bridge. 2 stoplights known for never sinking. Mum can't sit that long without pain flaring. Dad gets confused when the car stops and starts. We will be late. We will arrive rattled. I am not going to roll the dice on a red light. I pull up our transport plan. The helicopter is the sensible move. 12 minutes in the air, direct approach to the hospital pad crew, trained to load gently, room for all of us. Not a flex. An ambulance, you can land. I text Danny, land on the front lawn in about 15 minutes, low and quiet. Keep the approach shallow so the windows don't rattle. Confirm, Cole is flying. Confirm, route cleared. She replies within seconds. Pilot confirmed, route cleared, landing. Window approved, hospital notified, specialist's office on alerts. I ask her to call Harbourlight too. If today goes well, I want them ready to give us a tour right after, while my brother is still listening and my sister hasn't switched the subject back to kitchens and lighting. Danny says the director will meet us at the front gate if we come. Good. I think through the lawn. Maple to the left, driveway to the right, power lines. Behind the far fence, enough flat space in the centre. Mum will need curtains drawn so she doesn't feel watched. Dad will need a hand and a calm voice. I will take him by the elbow. Someone else will take her bag. We will go slow for 1 minute, and then we will be moving fast. I step back into the living room. Grant is still presenting. Sienna is nodding. Miles is taking photos of the slides like costs need a filter. I say nothing. I keep the cover until I need to lift it. I check my phone face down for 1 second. Danny has sent a short stack of confirmations. Hospital ETA helipad cleared, door-to-door transfer time. I lock the screen. I look at my mother's careful posture and my father's lost eyes and feel the same answer rise in me that carried me out of the bus station with $200 in an envelope. Do the next right thing and then the one after. If we leave soon, Dad makes the appointment. Mum meets the rehab team. That is the scoreboard. I wait for a pause in Grant's voice and pick a narrow lane, 1 sentence, no edges. If I can get them to the specialist today, will you come? He blinks, surprised by the word today. He says we should be realistic. Logistics, traffic, timing. He says like, I haven't lived by clocks for a decade. Sienna looks at me and says, "Today, really that fast?" "Yes," I say. "It's arranged. It will be respectful and safe." Grant asks what I mean by arranged. He tries to keep his tone even and leader-like. I don't answer that part yet. I tell him what matters if we move. Now we make the opening, and there is no telling when the next one comes. He glances at the deck, like it can veto the body sitting in front of him. I can feel him weighing whether he wants to be the one to say no to a doctor's slot that just opened. He doesn't say no. He says he needs 5 minutes to finish his section. He thinks 5 minutes keeps him in charge. He doesn't know what is already inbound. I nod. "Take 5, I say. I'm not here to score points. I'm here to move the day." While he clicks to the next slide, I sit by Mum again and ask if we can try the stand without hands one more time, just a little. She breathes, sets her feet, leans forward and rises a few inches. Her face tightens. "That's enough," I say, and help her sit. 6 out of 10, she says, then adds quietly that she doesn't want to be a burden. "You're not," I say. "You're the reason we're doing this right." I take Dad's hand and ask him if he will come see a new doctor who understands how memory works. He says he doesn't need doctors because he feels fine today. Then he looks at the wall like it moved. He tells me about the neighbour's dog again, and I listen like it's the first time because for him it is. I stand text Danny, one more time, approach on schedule, keep it quiet, call me on final. She replies that Cole will call when he's 2 minutes out. I think about the neighbour who likes to record things from her porch. Let her record something useful for once, I think, and then I feel a small stab of guilt for even caring. I don't want a show. I want my parents in rooms where the staff uses their names and waits for their answers. Grant lands his last point with the red dot on the screen and looks pleased with the way the numbers line up. He asks if we all agree to consider his preferred facility. I say we can talk about everything after the appointment this afternoon. Dad will be tired after testing and Mom will need to sit, so let's keep our energy for what matters. Sienna asks what she should pack for Mum. Start with comfort shoes and the warm coat, I say. She nods and pulls out her phone to make a list. Miles says he'll get the car and meet us out front. "No car," I say gentle. "It will be easier another way." He looks confused but shrugs. "Fine," he says. I step to the window and check the lawn again. Enough space, level ground. I pull the curtains most of the way for Mum. I turn back to Grant. "When this arrives, just follow my lead," I say. He lifts his chin like I've asked for permission. I don't need it. I'm asking for speed. He looks at our parents and something in his face softens. He nods once. Good. I text Danny the final go. I put my phone away and sit beside Mum. I take her hand. Dad hums a tune he can't place. The house is quiet, except for the soft push of air through the vents. In a few minutes, everything will get loud for a moment, and then it will get simple. We go. We get answers. We make a plan, with facts, not guesses. That's the reason I came home. That's the only win I care about. That's the reason I came home. That's the only win I care about. By dinner, the table was already set. Grant had gone with a catered spread linen napkins, folded into precise triangles, candles in heavy glass holders, dishes plated like they'd been arranged for a magazine. Mum sat at the far end, adjusting her position carefully, and said, "This must have cost a fortune," her voice carrying both gratitude and a hint of worry. I took my seat without comment. I knew better than to say anything that might turn the moment into a debate about money. Sienna leaned over with a small white envelope and slid it across the table toward me. Just a little something, she said. Maybe for some professional clothes. For interviews, you know. Her tone was light, almost sweet, but the words landed heavy. I smiled, said thank you, and put it beside my plate, She didn't need to know I'd worn the same jeans to a deal, signing that netted more than most houses on this street. Miles poured himself a glass of wine, waited until everyone's attention turned to him and said, "We finally did it. Italian marble countertops in the kitchen. Imported, not the knockoff stuff. You can tell by the veining." He looked right at me like I was supposed to nod with envy. I did nod, but then asked how the lemon tree in the back had been doing this year. He hesitated before answering, probably realising I'd skipped the expected compliment. The little details were harder to ignore. In front of everyone else, there were printed name cards. In front of me, a handwritten card that said, "Guest" in block letters. My seat wasn't a dining chair, it was an ottoman, a little too low, with a wobble every time I shifted. And when the coffee came after dinner, there was 1 teaspoon missing from the set. Mine. I stirred with a soup spoon, and no one seemed to notice. They said help, but the way they set the spoons had already decided my seat. Grant leaned back and crossed his arms. "I know a company looking for someone to start in an entry-level role," he said. "Steady pay, good benefits. Would be better than couch surfing, right?" His face was neutral, but the choice of words wasn't. I let the smallest smile appear, but I didn't answer. There was no point. He wasn't asking. He was assuming. Miles laughed at something Sienna said, and she joined in the kind of laughter that happens more at a performance than in a conversation. Grant kept steering topics back to himself. His projects, his trips, his ideas for fixing things. When I started to talk about the work Harbourlight was doing with small homes for memory care, he interrupted to ask Mum if she'd tried the soup yet. Sienna passed the bread without making eye contact. Mum tried to keep the tone light, asking about neighbours and old friends, but every so often she'd glance at me with that small tilt of the head she'd used when I was younger, the one that meant, "Are you okay? I was fine. More than fine." But I had no intention of proving it tonight. This was their stage, their script. I'd let them finish it before I opened mine. I took another sip of coffee, felt the soup spoon against my teeth, and kept my face calm. Miles went back to the marble story this time, adding details about the contractor and the shipping delays. Grant launched into a story about a leadership seminar. Sienna leaned toward Mum to talk about redecorating the guest room. It was easy to fade into the background when they wanted me there. That was fine. In a few hours, the room would feel very different. They could keep setting the table their way. I was already setting the day my way. They could keep setting the table their way. I was already setting the day my way. The next morning, Grant called us into the dining room like it was a board meeting. He had his laptop open, a neat stack of printed handouts beside him. Sienna and Miles took their seats together. Mum eased herself into a chair with careful movements. Dad sat staring out the window. I sat at the far end, no papers in front of me. Grant clicked to the first slide. 3 glossy photos of senior living facilities appeared on the screen-wide lawns, spotless lobbies, smiling staff. Harbourlight wasn't one of them. "I've narrowed it down to the best options," he said. "All top-rated. All capable of handling Dad's condition and Mum's recovery." I didn't point out the one option missing. He moved to the next slide. This one was a table of numbers. Each facility averaged $12,000 a month. Between their pensions and social security, Mum and Dad can cover about $4,000, Grant said. That leaves $8,000 every month we need to figure out. He let the number hang in the air for a beat. Then, the next slide broke it down into percentages. "I'll take 45%, he said. That's $3,600 a month." He clicked again. "Sienna and Miles will take 40%, $3,200. Nora, 15%, $1,200 a month." Miles nodded, like it was already settled. Sienna glanced at me, her expression neutral but expectant. "I've run the math," Grant continued, "and this split keeps it fair, based on what we each can manage." Then, he added, "If that's too much, Nora can contribute time instead of money. Be here to help with appointments meals the day-to-day. We can adjust. His tone was smooth, but the meaning was sharp. Time instead of money, like the money part was beyond me. I felt the old reflex to correct him rise, and then settle back down. I didn't need to correct him. I wanted to hear the whole story they'd built without my input. That works out to each of us doing our part, Miles said, leaning back. It's fair. Sienna nodded. It keeps things balanced, she added. Mum looked down at her hands in her lap. Dad didn't seem to be following any of it. $1,200 suddenly became the price of my place in this family. Grant moved on to another slide about timelines and decision dates, speaking in that steady, measured way he used when closing a deal. I kept my eyes on the screen, memorizing the way the numbers looked in his format. Sienna asked a question about the ratio of staff to residents. Miles wanted to know about the fitness facilities for active seniors. Grant answered each, never looking my way for long. Mum cleared her throat once, like she might say something, then stayed quiet. The meeting went on for another 20 minutes. The numbers repeated the words. Fair, balanced, and manageable, tossed around like anchors that kept the plan steady. I didn't touch the printout they'd slid toward me. I didn't need it. I knew my number, their number, and the gap between what they thought I could do and what I was already doing. When Grant wrapped up, he looked at me. So he said, "Are you good with that?" I smiled just enough to pass for agreement. "I've got it," I said. That was true, just not the way he thought. They were building a budget. I was building a reveal. I stepped onto the back porch with my phone, the air cool and clean, the kind that wakes up your skin. I typed, "Fast wire $120,000 to Harbourlight Village first-year fee, flexible terms, hold a unit, send me confirmation." Danny replied that she was on it, then asked if I wanted the hospital and the foundation notified in parallel. "Yes, both," I wrote. "Keep it quiet and professional. No drama." I slid the phone in my pocket and looked through the kitchen window at my family moving around the dining room like pieces on a familiar board. If they needed to think I was still the guest at my own table for another hour, fine. We would use that hour. 10 minutes later, the house landline rang, that deep, old bell sound we almost never heard anymore. Grant grabbed it like it was a sales call. "Hail, residents," he said. His voice changed on the second sentence. He glanced at me the way people look at something they can't place. "It's for you," he said, and handed over the receiver. The voice on the line was warm and steady. She introduced herself as the director of Harbourlight Village and used my full name without stumbling. She said they'd received the deposit and that a small home unit would open in 2 weeks. She could arrange a private tour this afternoon, and the clinical team could meet us to answer questions about memory care and post-op plans. I kept my answer simple. "Thank you. Yes, this afternoon works. Will arrive with my parents. Please hold the time." She confirmed, promised to email a map and access instructions, and added that the garden path by the east wing was in bloom if my mother liked to walk short distances. I thanked her again and hung up. I didn't make a speech. I looked at Grant. He had that fixed smile he wears when something doesn't fit his slide. Sienna drifted into the doorway, curious, hands poised like she might clap if this turned back into a story about marble and lighting. "Harbourlight," she said. "That's not on the list. It's not open to the public," I said. "We can tour it this afternoon. They're expecting us." Grant let out a small breath through his nose. "If it were good, it would be in my deck," he said. He tried to sound amused. It came out narrow. I nodded. "Maybe," I said. Then I walked to the counter, pulled a pen from the junk drawer, and wrote the time on a sticky note where everyone could see it. Behind the patio glass, there was the faintest tremor, just enough to blur a reflection for half a second. You could call it nothing. You could call it a breeze. I knew what it was. Money left the account like a latch clicking in their heads. A mechanism they didn't know they had just moved to open. I sent Danny a short update deposit. Confirmed Tor locked share packet with the director attached. Dad's latest notes attach Mum's PT plan. She wrote back that she'd already sent the summary and that the hospital was standing by for our arrival this afternoon. Pilot confirmed. Route confirmed. Approach planned. I asked her to alert the staff at Humiliate that my father sometimes freezes when he's asked 2 questions at once, and to make sure there would be a quiet corner for my mother to sit if she got tired. She replied that the team would be ready chairs, set water poured, names learn it. I turned back to the dining room. Grant had reshuffled his printouts as if the paper could reassert his position. Sienna hovered, trying to gauge which way the room would go. Miles looked at me like he wanted to ask which brand Humiliate used for their fixtures. Mum watched our faces. Dad watched the window. I said, "We have a slot this afternoon with the specialist and a private tour right after. If we leave soon, we make both." Grant asked, "How are we getting there?" He meant cars, parking, valet traffic. Who sits where? "I have transport covered," I said. "It'll be safe and quick." He didn't like the vagueness. He was about to ask again when Mum shifted and winced and everyone's eyes moved to her. Timing is the oldest partner I have. I checked the lawn in my head maple on the left driveway on the right power lines, behind the back fence, a neat rectangle of flat grass in the centre. Curtains would need to be drawn a little for Mum's comfort. Dad would need a simple sentence and a hand at his elbow. Cole would come in low and slow so the glass stayed where it belonged. We would be loud for 1 minute and then quiet for the rest of the day. I poured a glass of water for Mum and set it down within easy reach. "You'll like the garden at the place we're seeing," I told her. "Short path, good railings, real plants." She smiled and asked if they had roses. I said I'd ask the director to meet us by the east wing. Dad asked if we were going somewhere today. I said yes to see doctors who are good at remembering how to help people remember. He nodded like that settled it. Sienna touched the white envelope she'd given me the night before, as if to remind herself she'd done her part. "Is this place expensive?" she asked, careful around the word. "It's what we need," I said. "And it's ready." I didn't add that the cost was already covered for the first year, or that the terms were flexible by design, or that the trust paperwork was sitting at Stonecrest on a marble table waiting for signatures. There are truths that land better when they are shown in the right order. Grant opened his laptop halfway, like he might rescue the moment with another slide. "We should still compare," he said. "Due diligence." "We can compare after the visit," I said. "I'm not asking you to commit to anything today. I'm asking you to come see." He heard the calm and didn't know where to put it. He closed the laptop. The glass pane by the patio trembled again, softer this time, like a reminder in a quiet voice. I took my phone out and typed a final note to Danny. "Be ready on my call. Come to the front lawn, keep the approach soft, minimize rattle, neighbours will look." "That's fine. Our focus is our parents." She replied with a single line, all set. I stood next to Dad and told him we were leaving soon. He patted his pockets for keys he doesn't carry anymore. I handed him his jacket instead. Mum reached for her cane and then for my hand. I let her hold both. Sienna said she would grab the warm coat we talked about. Miles asked if he should pull the car around anyway. "No car," I said, gentle. "We'll take another way." He frowned, but didn't press. Grant stared out at the lawn like it had done something to him. He was thinking about appearances, about neighbours, about control. He was also, maybe for the first time, thinking about time. There are days you can afford to waste and days you can't. This wasn't one we could. I walked to the front door and unlocked it. The air that came in was cooler than in back touched by the open street. A neighbour crossed her yard with a phone in her hand, more curious than nosy. Across the room, the landline sat quiet, the way quiet gets right before a new sound takes the space it needs. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't need to. I had spent a decade learning what it feels like to be right on time. When the ride gets here, I said to Grant without turning, "Just follow my lead." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The house held still the way a breath holds still. The glass whispered once. Then the air over our lawn began to change shape. We were done talking. We were moving. The thump started as a distant pulse and thickened until it was part of the room. Air shifted at the windows. The curtains breathed in and out. A neighbour stepped onto her porch with her phone up, then another. I checked my mother first. Her hand tightened around the cane. Her face went pale in the mouth. "Breathe," I said, steady and low. "You're okay." She nodded, then her eyes rolled for a second, and her knees softened. I caught her shoulder and eased her back into the chair, no twisting at the hip head-forward water to her lips. Her colour returned in a slow wave. "Just a scare," I said. "We're going to move slow for 1 minute, then it gets easy." My father stared at the window like a film was playing on the glass. "What is that?" he asked. "A ride," I said. "For us." I unlocked the front door. Cool air pressed in. The rotors deepened, not movie loud, just heavy and regular like a serious heart. I looked at Grant and Sienna. "You're right," I said, voice level. "I don't own a car." I stepped onto the porch and lifted one hand so Cole could see me. He was where he should be, low, slow nose, pointed just off the maple, holding enough power to stay gentle. The neighbours whispered and lifted phones higher. I pulled the living room curtains halfway shut for Mum, because I can do 2 things at once, protect privacy and keep time. I went back to the doorway. "We can still make Dad's appointment if we go now," I said. Not a question. The reason. Grant closed his mouth on whatever he wanted to say and nodded once. Sienna snapped into motion, grabbed the warm coat and the small bag of meds, checked for the list the doctor's office had emailed. Miles took the tote with water and snacks. The house felt like a long inhale waiting for the exhale. "Rolls," I said. "Grant, you're on Dad's elbow." Short sentences, 1 step at a time. "Sienna, you take Mum's coat and bag and stay on her right side. Miles, you close and lock behind us." They moved. I set the pace, 5 counts to the threshold. 2 to the top step, 2 more to the lawn. The grass flattened in rings. Cole bled power to keep the wash down. I handed Mum and Dad the soft headsets. "Put these on," I said. "Talk with your eyes." Mum met my eyes and nodded. Dad copied her. I took his hand and placed it on the armrest he would use practicing the motion before we reached it. The pilot held steady, low and polite. I'd asked for low and polite. Danny's text buzzed in my pocket without me checking it. "Hospital team, ready door. Team, ready, slot held. Timing is the whole trick." We reached the skids. "Step," I said to Dad. "Sit, belt." He followed the words like stepping stones. His hands shook, but they did what they were told. I took Mum next with Sienna and Miles bracing. "Face me," I said to her. Small steps, no twist. We moved, as a pair then as a triangle. Then she was in and seated, and I slid the belt into place. The cane went into the side rack, the med bag under the seat. I looked over my shoulder at Grant. He was standing on the lawn with his mouth closed, eyes on me like he was learning a language he didn't know I spoke. I chose silence so the Rotors could say what words never could. I pulled the door, and it shut with a clean clack. The noise dropped to a contained thrum. Mum's hand found mine. I squeezed once. Dad looked at the panel lights and seemed calmer, the way some people calm down when given a list. Grant tapped the window and pointed at his ear. I clicked the intercom. "We'll talk about costs later," he said, voice tinny and controlled. "We'll talk after facts," I said, and broke the channel. Cole held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The machine lifted. The lawn fell away a little, then a little more. My stomach floated and settled. The house stepped back to a small white shape with a maple guarding it. The neighbours' phones turned into dots. The town laid itself out like a map I had walked with my feet 100 times. Hardware store, the park, the water tower with the peeling paint. Mum breathed in time with the engine. Dad squeezed my hand once and then stared at the horizon line like it would help him keep his balance. "Down there," he said and smiled without the name. "Yes," I said. "Down there." Cole banked us gently and lined up with the hospital pad. 5 minutes, he said over the headsets. I nodded and leaned close to Mum's ear. "When we land, there's a chair," I said. "You'll sit. Then a warm hallway. Then a quiet room." She nodded. I leaned to Dad. "We're meeting a doctor who's good at helping people remember," I said. "I'll be with you." He seemed to settle into the promise. The town slid behind us. The hospital grew. The pad lights blinked like patience. I thought about the years I'd kept quiet and why freedom, safety, focus. I thought about what all that quiet was for this right now, the ability to decide and move and not ask for permission to do the right thing in the right order. Cole called final. The wind pulled at the grass on the rooftop and let it go. We came down like we belonged there because today we did. The skids touched with a firm kiss. "We're on time," I said more to myself than anyone, but Mum heard it and smiled, and Dad repeated the words like they were his idea. Grant opened the door on his side as soon as the signal flashed safe. The wash softened. The world unclenched. A transport tech in a yellow vest waved us toward the entrance. I unbuckled Mum. First then, Dad, same order we boarded. "Small steps," I said. "Eyes on me." We moved into the warm air of the corridor, and the sound of the Rotors began to fall away behind us. The phones on porches would have their video. The neighbours would have something to talk about. I had my parents between my hands, and a clock that was finally on our side. The rest we could sort after facts. The hospital took Dad's vitals, ran the quick screens, set the longer tests, and gave Mum a short consult on her hip. When we finished, I chose speed over debate and had us flown to Stonecrest. The Rotors faded into quiet as soon as we touched down on the pad behind the trees. Inside the foyer was bright and calm, a long pane of glass facing the lake, so the water felt like part of the room. Danny met us at the door, simple, black blazer hair, pulled back, no fuss. "Welcome," she said, and put a slim leather binder in my hands. Family portfolio. Tabs are colour-coded. I led everyone to the marble table in the centre of the room. The stone was cool under my palms, steady in a way I needed. "We'll walk through this," I said. "No speeches." Danny stood to one side, ready to flip pages when I nodded. Grant looked around like the house might answer a question he couldn't form. Sienna took Mum's coat and eased her into a chair. Dad stood for a beat, watching the light on the lake, then sat when I touched the back of his arm. I opened the binder. "First, one line about work, so the rest makes sense," I said. Kite Lock sold for over 50 million. I kept equity. I still run the small business unit. I don't do displays, I do plans. I let that settle without drama and tapped the first tab. Trust. Danny turned the page. "Revocable, living trust in your names," I said to my parents. "Evelyn and Robert. It pays for care without gaps, facility fees, meds, transport, unexpected needs. Here are the medical directives, and here is the healthcare power of attorney. We'll only sign this if you're comfortable, and we can talk about who holds what and when." I pointed to the signature lines but didn't push the pen across. This keeps the care moving even when life gets messy. Mum reached out and touched her name with one finger, like she was making sure it was real. Dad leaned closer, then looked up at me for a cue. I nodded. "We'll go slow," I said. "Nothing today has to be a surprise." Next tab, Harbour Light. Danny turned the page again. "This is the place I've been building toward," I said. "Small homes, 8 to 10 residents, short halls, open kitchen, stable staff. There's a therapeutic garden and no blaring televisions. We wired a deposit this morning. A unit opens in 2 weeks. They held a tour for us. We can go right after we finish here or first thing tomorrow. They do step-up care as needs change. Family can visit at normal hours and be part of routines. I pointed at a photo in the packet of a sunlit kitchen table with 2 cups and a puzzle half finished. Dignity is the design, I said. That's the point. Sienna's hands hovered over the pictures, careful not to smudge anything like the paper belonged to a museum. Grant stayed quiet. His eyes moved, but he didn't ask a question. I flipped to the next tab. Rehab, Mum. Weeks 4 through 6 is where we are now, I said. Sit to stand with supervision short walks, 5 to 10 minutes several times a day, no twisting at the hip. Week 5, add small steps and more legwork. By week 6, you practice stairs with 1 rail, and we want pain at or under 3 out of 10 after activity. Humiliate has morning PT sessions Monday through Thursday. I already held slots. We'll check fit with the therapist and adjust if needed. Mum breathed out relief and nerves mixed. Slow is still forward, I said. You don't have to win the hallway in 1 day. She smiled at that. Next tab. Cognitive. Dad, these are the tools the memory team uses to see where we are and what helps, I said. 3-word recall right away and again in 5 minutes. Clock drawing for reading and space. A simple figure copy to see how your brain maps shapes. Today gave us a starting point. We'll test again in 3 months. In between, they focus on memory that matters music, photos, with names on the back, stories we can repeat without pressure, quiet rooms, steady routines. Dad nodded, like he understood more than the words, and that was enough. We'll build a rhythm you can lean on, I added. Danny moved to the finance tab when I tapped. This part is not a show, I said. It's why we don't have to argue about splits. The trust covers $12,000 a month for care plus equipment and transport with a 9 to 12 month buffer. I still have salary and equity. No one needs to keep score with rent-sized math. I didn't look at Grant when I said it. I looked at my parents. This is covered. The point is getting the care right. For the first time all day, Grant didn't have a line. He put a hand on the edge of the table and let it stay there. Sienna reached into her purse and took out the gift card she gave me last night. She set it on the marble between us, then looked up with eyes wet but steady. I didn't know she said. I'm sorry, you didn't have to know I said, and I meant it. Privacy keeps the work clean. I wanted freedom to build this without defending it every call. I wasn't hiding to win. I was preparing to care. I closed my hand over the binder for a second, then opened it again. I didn't bring knives to the table, I brought paperwork. The room sat in that sentence for a moment, like it was a bench we all needed. Mum asked, "Is this too much for you?" "It's exactly what I saved it for," I said. Dad looked at the Humiliate garden photo and asked if there were benches in the shade. "There are," I said, "and a path that loops so you never feel lost. We can put a small nameplate by a rose bush if you want." He smiled. Grant cleared his throat. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, voice smaller than I've ever heard it. I didn't answer with a speech. "You asked about appearances," I said, "not plans." He took that in. He didn't fire back. That was new. Sienna touched Mum's sleeve. "Are we still part of this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Different roles. Better fit. Grant, you're good with forms and deadlines. Insurance and medical records can live with you. Sienna, you're great at spaces and schedules. Help set up the room and the daily routine at Humiliate so it feels like Mum and Dad, not like a hotel. Miles can help with reporting and clean books for the foundation side so everything stays transparent. I'll handle finance, legal and the move itself." No one protested. It felt like placing pieces where they always should have been. I slid the signature pages toward my parents without pressure. "We don't have to sign today," I said, "but I want you to see what ready looks like." Mum ran a finger along the edge of the page and nodded. "I'd like to try a few steps," she said. She stood slow and careful, and I was there at her elbow. "Short steps," I reminded. No twist. She made it to the edge of the rug and back, then sat. Slow is still forward, she said, and we both smiled. Dad tapped the garden photo. I'd like to see this, he said. We will, I said, soon. Grant walked to the glass wall and looked at the lake like it could teach him something. He let his shoulders drop in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. Sienna picked up the gift card again and turned it over. Maybe we buy Mom that warm coat together, she said, not as a fix, just as a start. I'd like that, Mum said. I closed the binder gently. Next is simple, I said. We send the consent forms to the doctors, confirm the tour slot and pack what feels like home photos, the robe you like, good shoes, with Grip Dad's playlist loaded and labelled. I looked at the four of them and felt the room steady around us. This wasn't about winning, it was about putting care on rails so it didn't stall the next time life pushed. We can go when you're ready, I said. No one rushed, no one stalled. We stood together and let the plan be the loudest thing in the room. Grant was the one who broke the silence. You made us look like fools, he said, his voice low but sharp. I kept my eyes on him. I didn't write your story. You did. He frowned like he wanted to argue but couldn't quite find the footing. I took a breath. And I'll admit something. The helicopter wasn't just about getting to the doctor on time. Part of it was petty. Part of me wanted to end the guessing with a noise you couldn't ignore. I'm sorry it scared Mum. That part I regret. The truth settled between us like a weight. I stayed quiet because I like my freedom, because I like not having to defend my choices every time we talk. But silence has a cost. Truth that arrives late is still truth, just with fees attached. Grant leaned back. You think I don't get that his laugh was humorless? I hate 60% of my job. The deck. It's just the one thing I can control. I needed you to fit into the version of family where my choices made sense. I guess I needed you to fail. Sienna shifted in her seat. And I needed you, Small, she said to me. I didn't ask what you were really doing. I just handed you a gift card and filled the silence with my own version of you. By the way, Miles and I are in marriage counselling. The galas and the upgrades aren't fixing anything. Miles rubbed the back of his neck. That Italian marble thing, that was me hiding my own insecurity. It's easier to brag about stone than admit I don't know where I fit in all this. Grant shook his head, eyes narrowing. Privacy or deception? Which one was this? Privacy, I said. I chose what was mine to share. Deception would have been making you act on a lie. I didn't ask you to act. I let you assume. He blinked like he hadn't expected it to be that simple. And, yeah, I added, I see how long silence turns assumption into something that feels like fact. I slid the binder closer. I didn't bring this to make you admire me. I brought it so you could help me run it. The care plan works if we all do our parts. Danny, who'd been quiet, stepped forward. There's already a post about the helicopter in the neighbourhood group, she said. A few videos. People are speculating. Sienna winced. Grant muttered something under his breath. Here's what we do, I said. No one posts anything about Mom or Dad's health. If you have to answer, you say this. We transported our parents for a medical appointment. We'd appreciate privacy. That's it. Danny handles any calls or requests. No talk about money. No talk about Harbour Light online. Grant nodded slowly. Sienna gave a quick, okay. Miles lifted his hand. Fine by me. I looked at each of them. We keep the focus on them, not on us. I let a moment pass. I'm sorry for the scare, I said to all of them. Grant's mouth twitched. I'm sorry for assuming. Sienna's voice was quiet. I'm sorry for the gift card. Miles shrugged sheepish. Sorry for the marble speech. It didn't erase what had happened, but the air shifted. Less charge, more room. Help means we move the same direction. I said, not that we hold the same rope. Grant nodded like he understood the difference for the first time. Mum's voice came from the couch. "Are you children fighting?" We all turned. "We're okay," we said almost in unison. Dad was looking at the Harbour Light garden photo, and without prompting, he repeated one of the 3 words from his memory test. Sienna smiled. "That's a good sign," she said. I felt something ease in my chest. I went over the roles again, but without the edge, Grant with insurance and records, Sienna with setting up the room and routines, Miles with clean financial reports, for the foundation me with the legal, financial and the move. No one argued. Mum sipped her tea. Dad tapped the photo again. "Soon," he asked. "Soon," I said. Outside, the last light skimmed across the lake. I thought about how easily this could have gone another way, about how a plan without boundaries is just another fight waiting to happen. We had both now, and a clock. The next step was simple signed schedule move. We were at Harbour Light by 9 the next morning, all 4 of us and my parents. The director met us in the lobby, warm smile clipboard in hand, and walked us into a glass-walled conference room that smelled faintly of lemon polish. She explained the terms, private suite for each of them, small house model, with no more than 10 residents, full rehab support privacy protocols. She spoke clearly, no padding. When she finished, I pulled the pen from my bag and signed. The click of the pen cap landing on the table sounded like a latch closing for good. The move-in date was set for the 15th. We left with a folder of printed schedules and a checklist for personal items. It was practical and human things to make the space theirs. Winter clothes-framed photos, Dad's favourite armchair, Mum's worn recipe book. Grant suggested a shared Google sheet so we could split the list without overlap. We each took sections. I'd handle the legal papers, and transport arrangements Sienna would coordinate with staff on daily routines and set up the rooms Grant would take. Insurance and medical records Miles would manage the foundation's reporting and keep our monthly costs transparent. Back at Stonecrest that afternoon, I pulled the gift card from my wallet, the same one Sienna had handed me days ago, with a dig about professional clothes. I didn't make a speech about it. I just drove into town and bought a soft, warm coat for Mom, pale blue with a quilted lining. When I brought it home, she tried it on in front of the hallway mirror, running her hand down the sleeve. "It's warm," she said almost to herself. "That's enough." I smiled and said, "It's just a coat, Mum," but we both knew it wasn't. Over the next 2 days, we packed. Sienna labelled boxes in neat handwriting. Grant arranged for professional movers, with instructions to wrap the armchair in breathable fabric so it wouldn't trap the old scent Dad liked. I spent an hour on the phone with the lawyer finalising power of attorney documents and making sure the trust covered all projected care costs. Miles printed the first clean set of monthly financial summaries. By the morning of the doctor's appointment, everything had a place on the timeline. Cole brought the helicopter in low and quiet this time. No neighbours on porches, no phones in the air, it was just a ride. We landed on the hospital pad with 10 minutes to spare. Dad sat through the memory test, recalling one of the 3 words this time. The physician went over the results gently. "The progression is steady," he said. "We can't reverse it, but with the right environment and stimulation, we can slow it down." Mum listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. On the ride back, she touched my arm. "Thank you for getting us there on time. I hate feeling rushed." "We'll keep it this way," I said. Back at Stonecrest, the late afternoon light poured into the kitchen. I opened my laptop, pulled up the Harbour Light portal and clicked confirm on the contract and the insurance transfer. The notification ping was tiny, almost nothing, but it felt like a switch had been thrown in our lives. We had a date, a plan, and a path. Day 15 was circled in red on the wall calendar. For the first time in weeks, no one was arguing. We just moved around each other in the kitchen, fixing tea, checking lists, making sure each box had the right label. Outside, the lake caught the light and threw it back at the windows. I could feel the clock moving, but For once, it was moving in our direction. That night, Grant and I sat on the porch, the lake stretching dark and still in front of us. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into short glasses and handed me one. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The boards under our feet creaked when we shifted the only sound, besides the faint hum of crickets. "I got an offer," he said finally. "Teaching. Part-time. Business strategy at the university. I'm thinking about it." I looked at him over the rim of my glass. Grant, who'd lived and breathed quarterly reports and corporate politics since his 20s, was talking about walking into a classroom instead of a boardroom. "Sounds like balance," I said. He nodded. "I think I've been running on fumes for years. I just didn't want to admit it. We clinked glasses not to celebrate money, but how we'd use it." Sienna came out a few minutes later wearing one of Mum's old cardigans. She sat on the porch rail tucking her feet up. "I signed up to volunteer at Harbourlight," she said. "Art classes for the residents, once a week." Miles followed her out, hands in his pockets. "I'm looking into ethical investment portfolios for non-profits," he said, a little sheepish. "No fossil fuels, no shady industries. Maybe the Harbourlight Foundation could be a case study." No one teased him. We just let the ideas sit there in the night air, as if saying them out loud was enough for now. The next morning, we stood together on the front steps of Stonecrest for a family photo. It wasn't planned, just a moment that seemed right. Mum stood in the middle, wearing the blue coat I'd bought her without her cane. Dad was next to her holding her hand, his other arm looped loosely through mine. Sienna and Grant flanked them. Miles held the camera out on a timer. The smiles were real, unpracticed, not angled for social media. Later that week, there was another helicopter flight, but no drama. No neighbours craning their necks, no phones recording from across the street. Just Cole bringing us to Dad's physical therapy appointment on time. The Rotors were only Rotors now, a way to get where we needed to be, not a manifesto. Back at Stonecrest, the porch boards felt solid under my feet. I didn't need to be loud to be seen anymore. The plans, the follow-through, the way we stood together on those steps, that was enough. Some wins are loud. Others are just the sound of the porch boards under your feet holding steady. I decided I didn't have to choose between my parents and my own life. Cedar Springs could be home again part of the year. The city would stay in the other part for the work I still loved and the projects I wasn't finished with. I didn't need to live in one place to belong. One morning at Harbourlight, I watched Mum stand from her chair without using her hands. She smiled at me, a little surprised at herself, then took a step forward. It wasn't graceful, but it was steady. A week later, during Dad's memory check, he remembered one of the 3 words the nurse had told him at the start. Just one. He grinned like it was the punchline to a joke only he got, and I laughed with him. Progress didn't have to be perfect to matter. I thought about that afternoon when the helicopter came down in the driveway. I'd treated it like a weapon back then, something to slice through every false assumption my family had about me. And it worked. But that sound, as satisfying as it was, isn't what defines me now. It was just the noise that broke a label I never deserved. The truth is, wealth for me isn't the balance in my account or the equity in my company. It's being able to choose my values and live by them without asking for permission. It's taking care of my parents the way I think is right, building a life that fits me and never having to trade one for the other. I still use the helicopter sometimes, but now it's just for what it's good, at getting Dad to his appointments on time, taking Mum to a specialist without the long drive. No drama, no audience, just logistics. I've stopped living to prove something. I've started living to be present. And if you've ever been called less capable, less worthy, less enough, don't waste all your breath explaining why they're wrong. Let your actions speak. Let them make just enough noise to be heard. Then, let the quiet after prove the rest. So, here's my invitation. Tell me the time someone put you in a box you didn't belong in, and how you stepped out. You never know who needs to hear it.